Okay. Yeah. Before. Okay. Good evening, all, and good day, all. I'm sure Subbu, would have given you a brief introduction about myself. So I'm Bharat. I'm based out in Chennai. Yes. Currently, I work for Ramco. I recently joined Ramco a couple of months back. And as Subbu said, Subbu and I, we know each other for more than 25 years now. I think we started our career in Standard Chartered together. So yeah, so myself and I've been working in this information cybersecurity technology audits in the risk management profile for more than 25 years. Predominantly supporting banking domain, banking process. I also have experience in working with few big fours like PricewaterhouseCoopers and KPMG in Singapore as well as in India. So yeah, so holistically, my profile comprised of you know domains in majorly contributing towards information and cybersecurity as well as IT audit. That's what I said. So yeah, so a pretty interesting profile. And recently, as I said, I joined Ramco to kind of restructure or rebuild the cybersecurity practice for them. So that's how I started there. So this program is very close to me because third-party cybersecurity. My previous profile, I was with Standard Chartered for almost 3.5 years. Part of third-party cybersecurity team. I was managing a special portfolio there. Subbu and I have been discussing about this third-party cybersecurity risk, and we all really wanted to present something to the crowd because banks definitely offers a very tight security measures for the third-party vendors. So I've been part of this program. So within the third-party cybersecurity within Standard Chartered, I was actually supporting a few special projects assignments to redesign the controls, for third-party cybersecurity. Yeah, that's about my brief background. So, see, today's topic, I would like to share my thoughts on what I know on third-party cybersecurity. However, I would like to definitely have a discussion with all of you to understand your perspective, um, also to know your experience, in third-party cybersecurity. I think let's make it more interactive rather than me presenting it over because my experience in cybersecurity definitely, comes from what I've experienced in the companies what I work with. Definitely, if you can share your experience as well, I think that would be very interesting and keep this meeting alive and keep it going. Yeah. So yeah, but just for this presentation, I made a few slides today. I tried making a few slides for this presentation, in a structural format. But however, as I said, I think it will be more appropriate if you could, have some discussions and back and forth communication. That would help in keeping this 1 hour program very interesting. Yeah. Is it okay? Subbu and all?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I'm sure all of you. I think let's see the presentation flow, right? So what I've made is like overview of this program, like what is third party cybersecurity, right? So this term,
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
often.
Subbu, I mean, your presentation is not visible. It's only your.
Yeah, the email is visible, Bharat. I thought at some point of time you will switch over to the presentation, but I'm looking at my invite.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Should I give you the access so that you can present it in the one I've.
That is
Okay.
easy for you. So that if you want to navigate, it's easy, Bharat. That's why I was also thinking that.
Okay, no problem. Can you see my screen now? Is my presentation visible?
Now it's good.
Yeah, it's on second screen, second slide, presentation flow. We are able to see.
Is it moving ahead now?
Moving ahead, yeah, it's on overview now.
Okay.
Maybe if you can press F5 and make it an presentation mode. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Sure. Thanks, Subbu. Thanks. So this is the presentation flow which I've made, and see, typically this is a format, to know about what is third-party cybersecurity. And to begin with, what is cybersecurity in organizational terminology. and why it is a top priority or top concern to address. I think that's probably that's a part we could learn here. And what are the security risk and concerns? Typically, I've extracted it from my experience, which is coming from a banking domain. So, security risk and concerns on cybersecurity, and what is a well-defined cybersecurity program, and what are the steps needs to be implemented there, and what are the strategies to strengthen the process. I think this is the presentation flow I've made, and probably based on this, we can kind of discuss and move it forward. Yeah. So, what is third-party cybersecurity, right? So, third-party cybersecurity. So, before we talk about this individual line items, right? So, third-party cybersecurity type third-party. Who are these people, right? These are the vendors supporting the organization. So, the vendors could be the technology vendors. The vendors could be general logistics vendor. Vendor could be doing anything to kind of support your process or to enable your process, right? These are the vendors we're talking about. So it depends on the size of the organization, right? The third party, the count of the third party varies. For example, when I was with Standard Chartered, like we have they have close to 5,000 vendors supporting the bank process, which means like all these vendors are kind of some way they are trying to enable or helping the bank to improve the process and helping the bank to redefine their structure, right? So that's the kind of involvement this third party have with all these organizations. So they are very critical because they play a very important role in in strategies or redefine the strategies for any organization. So, what is third party? As I say, practices and measures, which not only from an organization perspective, from a overall, uh, executive leadership's vision perspective, they play a very important role in terms of practices and measures. And third-party cybersecurity also comprises of the best practices and standards which needs to be followed within an organization at the organization level, right? There are best practices and standards we'll talk about in the upcoming slide. So that compromise, the process what a third-party cybersecurity program enables. And third-party cybersecurity also talks about the contracts and obligations which gets fixed or connected with the organization overall from a vision and mission perspective. For example, if an organization signs a contract with third party, so there are a lot of clauses like legal clauses, financial clauses needs to be obliged for. So that this is a brief explanation, given in third party cybersecurity contract on what needs to be followed, what needs to be fulfilled and stuff like that. So that the second part of the program. And the last one, what we see in the screen is on this, a well-defined cybersecurity program, how it looks like, and what are the steps needs to be followed. That's the overall third-party cybersecurity. Yeah. So I think in a bank's world, right? All these are, I mean, third party, any third party or vendor is part of the strategy itself, right? If any new application, for example, is being developed, right? Obviously, either the outsourced application or in-house application. If the outsourced application, there comes the contracts and obligations and stuff like that, and that's where the connect with the third party starts. Right. Why it is important, as I say, predominantly in recent world, we have lots and lots of dependencies are there with third party. They are involved in, as I said, they are involved in the strategies and vision and mission. So we have a major reliance on third party. Almost 60 to 70% of the workers are being outsourced to third party. So they play a very important role, with our current infrastructure. They manage either they manage infrastructure or they kind of play a very important role in terms of holding most of our process and stuff like that. And any breach in the third party could lead to a significant loss to either to either to our financial stability, or it may bring a lot of legal repercussions and stuff like that, which may even result in losing our customer contracts and stuff like that. So we need to pay very special attention to third party cybersecurity program. And This I pulled out from one of the survey. Almost 60% of breaches originate from our third-party vulnerabilities. So the vendors who manages our infrastructure, right? So if their controls are weak, for example, if they don't apply the patches or if they don't apply the latest versions of any applications or which are being used to support our infrastructure, right? It leads to breaches, right? So 60% of breaches can originate from third party, which is a very important things to understand or note when it comes when the program is being outsourced to the vendor. So risk and concerns, if the controls are weak, with our third party, right? Obviously, which means that unauthorized access could happen, and it leads to data breaches and stuff like that. And it breaks the entire chain because we have a lot of dependencies with our vendors supporting us, right? So what happens is if anything happens to the vendor infrastructure which is being supported to us, right? So obviously there will be cut in the entire process. So we have a lot of dependencies within with the vendor as well as the vendor to other vendor, fourth party, and stuff like that. And what happens is if anything happens in the chain, break in the chain, so it obviously leads to the operational disruptions, and the entire process gets on hold. So it's a very serious concern. So we usually what happens is a routine scan gets triggered on our vendor cybersecurity vendor infrastructure. At least a quarterly or half-yearly scan, usually being conducted to make sure that vendors infrastructure is in line with our organization level policies and procedures. And in case if if the vendor is not in compliance with our policies procedures, what happens is it may lead to sometimes it lead to regulatory compliance, regulatory risk, because everything happens based on this contractual signing with the vendor and contractual signing with our own customers, right? Because we end of the day we support the customers. So if the third party's security control is not being in compliance with our policy, obviously it may lead to data breaches, and we lose customer trust, and leads to heavy penalties and fines. That's the overall scenario usually happens if there's a weak control being followed, right? So I think this is the overview, of the the third party cybersecurity process. And why it is important, at an organization level, right? Three important things from this slide, which probably I would like to emphasize here, right? We need to pay special attention to the vendors which are being supporting us, in our process and in our day to day operations, right? We need to do a regular monitoring of the vendors infrastructure, and they play a very significant role in terms of supporting our any process or any process which could be on development or could be on operational stuff. So they are kind of an extension for us. So we need to make sure that they are in compliance with our policies and procedures and stuff like that. So that's just very important, the overall structure with the third party cybersecurity program. Any questions here? Any questions or any feedback?
No, Bharat, we are fine.
Okay. Okay. Usually, right? There's various supporting models we have established with the vendor. So based on what model they follow, right? We designed this entire third-party cybersecurity program, right? So centralized program, which means like the vendor sits in one location and they support any organization, right? For example, they sit in, let's say, India, and they support the various customers across the geography, right? That's one model. And decentralized, as they spread across in different locations. For example, let's say Google is one of the vendor, or let's say Microsoft is one of the vendor, right? They sit in various locations, and they support various companies. That's the second model. And hybrid is like the mix of both, so centralized as well as decentralized, right? So based on this, right, again, we have a further classification, which means like the infrastructure which are being supported by the vendor could be on cloud or it could be on premises, right? This is very important because if the vendor is in cloud platform, right? So what happens is again depends on the data movement and stuff like that. Whether they're hosting our data in the cloud, or whether they're hosting our data in the data is not being shared or it will be hosted in the on-premises. So these are important aspects. We needs to be determined before you sign the contract with the vendor, right? As you know, cloud, it could be on private cloud, it could be on public cloud, which means in your private your private data centers, or hybrid, which is a mix of both. On premises, which means in either in data center of the vendor, or the on premises within your own data center. So these are the important criteria which you may have to understand before you sign the contract, because based on the location where the data is going to reside, right? That's going to determine the scrutiny of the control, which is going to be designed for the third party. So this is just a rough overview on how the vendor support model works. But I think while you're designing the control, these needs to be definitely taken into account. In terms of doing a detailed testing on, especially from the data side, especially from testing the controls, on the interfaces and stuff like that, how the data is going to move from vendor premises to the organization and stuff like that. Yeah. So, say any program has a life cycle, right? So as a case with cybersecurity, third-party cybersecurity management program, right? So typically, what happens is if a business wants to get a service from a vendor, right? So I'll explain you from the experience what I've gained from my previous banking knowledge. So what happens is if any business wants to take support from a vendor, right? What happens is they usually have to do assessment on various vendors, and finally they shortlist the vendor based on the requirement and budget and the need for the tower and stuff like that, right? Once they finalize the vendor, and what happens is the next step is they need to kind of formally sign the contract with vendor, initial signing of the contract. And in the contract it clearly talks about what is the requirement they need with the vendor, and the security clauses the vendor needs to oblige with, in compliance with. And a lot of legal clauses would be there, regulatory clauses would be there, operational clauses would be there. And finally what happens is once vendor signs the contract with the organization, right? Obviously they take it to the first level, right? Which means they got to interact with the local teams to kind of fulfill the financial requirement, and and administrative formalities and logistics and stuff like that. Once those things gets resolved, what happens is it comes to the cybersecurity team, or team who is managing this the entire security program, and it comes to them for the further reviews and the further process. The first thing, what happens in this program, right? Cybersecurity, third party cybersecurity awareness, third party cybersecurity program is, we need to sit with the business to identify the risk of the vendor, or to understand the control or controls or infrastructure vendor at a very brief level, at a kind of a overall level. So the risk identification phase is a phase where it talks about vendors, cybersecurity, or the business requirement with the vendor, and what services the vendor is going to provide for the business. So obviously, with this the exercise, it will lead to detailed explanation on what kind of data is being supported by the vendor, but what kind of data movement is going to happen, and what kind of support is going to be supported by the vendor. What are the locations being supported? How many users are being supported, by this vendor, and what exactly they're going to do with this, for the organization. Are they going to do an application development, or are they going to support an infrastructure? Those kind of categories would be there, would be there, or be updated in this risk identification phase. So usually depends on the organization, right? Usually all this gets entered in a tool, or depends on the design of the process. uh, Usually it gets all these informations pertaining to the risk identification gets uploaded in the tool. So usually how it goes is the risk identification the risk identification or third party risk identification manager sits with the business, understands all the criteria, and the overall purpose of this risk identification phase is to derive the inherent risk what the vendor has. Inherent risk is the, as you know, is the raw risk of the vendor, and based on the risk scoring of the inherent risk scoring of the vendor, usually the next phase or the risk assessment phase gets triggered. So usually the risk levels, inherent risk level varies between 1 to 5. 1 being the minor or very low, then 2 being low, 3 being moderate, 4 being high, and 5 being critical. So based on this risk scoring, what happens is the design of the control being defined. So if the vendor inherent risk score is 1 or 2, usually what happens is a detailed testing won't get conducted. Usually, we do a self-assessment, or we send the self-assessment questionnaire to the vendor, and the vendor in turn fill in the self-assessment questionnaire and send it back to us. So the scoring of the risk identification phase, the inherent scoring of the risk identification phase is determined to classify the kind of testing needs to be conducted in risk assessment stage. That's the second stage I'm talking about. So overall risk identification talks about the derives the inherent risk of the vendor, right? That's the first stage. Usually happens in the third-party cybersecurity program. Next comes to the risk assessment stage. Once the risk is being identified, at various levels, starting from 1 to 5, what happens is usually, it depends on, again, depends on the organization. Uh, you know, Usually the questionnaires or the control program gets defined. As I said, for inherent risk 1 and 2, self attestation program gets defined and triggered to the vendor, and vendor fills the self assessment program, and a set of questions like 20-25 questions gets triggered, and the vendor has to go and fill in the questions. And usually they may not have options to give a detailed answer. Usually it has things like yes or no answers with some comments and stuff like that needs to be filled in, and that comes back to the risk managers for further review. This for 1 and 2 category. For 3, 4, and 5, and a detailed level of testing gets conducted in the risk assessment phase. So if I say detail level testing, right, usually what happens is the control gets defined using the best practices and standards like ISO 27001 and NIST and stuff like that. Usually the organization would have the detailed control procedures based on this 27001 program. So with various domains being embedded in that. So what happens is if the inherent risk of the vendor is 3, 4, or 5, so what happens is automatically it triggers for the detailed control testing. Depends on the rating, which as I said. So again, we have another classification of for the vendor, which is tier 1 vendor, 2 vendor, and tier 3 vendor. So tier 1 being the most complicated, and I would say in terms of this, either the size of the vendor or the kind of support they do, financial number of transactions they initiate, a number of transactions they support. So that determines the tier of the vendor, and tier 2 is less complicated than tier 1, and tier 3 is low level of vendor. So both together, tiers and the inherent risk rating, that defines the control program needs to be tested for the vendor. So if it is, let's say, assuming if it is ISR rating, inherent risk rating is 3, right, moderate, which is moderate, and if it is for tier 1 vendor, right, usually a set of 50 questions or 60 questions get generated, based on the requirement. So if I say questions, right, these questions are, as I said, coming from ISO 27000 standard or NIST standard, and that gets triggered, and we need to do a detailed testing, design and operational testing for the particular vendor. Right. Any questions here? Let me, before we move on to the testing phase, probably I would like to take some views on any expectations or any views on the subject. Any questions from the crowd?
Yeah, continue. There's something. Yeah, please. There's someone. Yeah.
Yeah, and please stop me if I'm going faster, because I think there are not many to cover, but I'm just running a little faster. But yeah, so as you know, ISO 27001 and NIC have this set of, as a set of controls to be tested, right? So we use the same controls to test for these vendors as well. For example, we have access domain, we have physical security, we have cryptography, we have operation security, communication security. All these are the controls coming from ISO 27001, and same thing with NIST. And sometimes a company like Standard Chartered, and I've seen in few other companies, right? So they have this integrated control testing framework where they combined multiple framework together. For example, NIST 27001 and PCI DSS and all this together, and they test. It's called Unified Control Framework Library, and they test it against a vendor, which means that they're ensuring that all these frameworks are being tested against a vendor from whom they're getting the support. So yeah, so in fact, in Standard Chartered, we used to follow some this kind of unified control testing framework, and I think most of the companies follow this because it's more efficient, and and it is helping to make sure that by one testing, right, we could cover multiple framework at one stage. So, so what happens is in the risk assessment stage, we take this controls from ISO 27001 and NIST and and SOC 2 and stuff like that, and we test against the control. So usually it happens. The first stage will be scoping. The scoping needs to be defined, and then it goes for design testing of the control, and next goes to the operational effectiveness, and finally we issue the report to the vendor. So design, we take one sample, for example, access control domain, right? So we take the list of vendors access who are supporting, I work for Ramco, right? So if we have a vendor for Ramco, we take the list of the vendor names or vendor list of vendors who are supporting Ramco infrastructure. We make sure that their user provisioning, revocation, or the user access review are being properly defined and being tested as per our compliance policies and procedures, right? And we make sure that we take this sufficient evidences for quantifying that as well. So design testing taken care usually being tested with one evidence to begin with. Then if the design is fine, then we go with operational testing, which means we take the sample based on the frequency and we test it. Because some samples may need more, some process may need more sample. For example, backup. If you test the backup of the vendor, right, they may take daily backup, they may take weekly backup or monthly backup. So we take more samples based on the frequencies, frequency of the control. So yeah, so we take one sample for design, as I said, and multiple sample, or depends on the frequency of the control. We take sample to test the operational effectiveness of the vendor's control infrastructure, right? Ultimately, the purpose of the risk assessment of the vendor is to make sure that they have a bare minimum or a reasonable security process in place to support us, because this happens before they get onboarded to our infrastructure, right? Because they may not be directly in compliance with the organizational policies and procedures because they're still yet to be onboarded. But still, we need to make sure that their current security policies and practices are kind of have a reasonable assurance to support us. And once we onboard them, then we'll we do a periodic assessment or continuous monitoring and stuff like that, which comes the next day. That's about risk assessment. So what happens in the risk assessment stage? Once you test the controls, as I said, typically based on the inherent risk as well as the which is associated with the tiering of the vendor. Let's say, assuming that we test 50 controls for the vendor, so we test each and every control, and the end output would be the report or the list of observations are being raised with the vendor. Observations could be on weak policies, or observations could be on, let's say, inefficient user access management process. The observation could be on, lack of cryptography process, which is there in the vendor infrastructure. So all this comes as an observation, and usually the high observation is a must thing to close before we onboard the vendor. And medium, sometimes, yes, depends on the magnitude of the issue. And though we have less concern, so end of the day, the vendor has to make sure that at least the medium and the low high observation needs to be closed, should be closed before we onboard them to our infrastructure. So that's the usual understanding or contractual obligations before we onboard the vendor to our infrastructure. So once a the report is out to the vendor, right? Once we send the report to the business on the vendor risk assessment process about whosoever vendor we are onboarding, it's up to the business to make sure that they work on the gaps. They work with the business to address the gaps and to make sure that the gaps are being addressed, especially the high and medium gaps, as I said, needs to be closed before we onboard them. So what happens is depends on the criticality of the observation. The number of days to close the gap is being determined. For example, for if you raise high observation or gaps, um, usually the vendor has to close the high observation within 30 days of 30 days time from the date the report is being issued. And if it is medium level observation, right, what happens is we give 60 days time to address the gap.
Why?
Sorry. Is there a question?
Request you to speak on, go on mute, please.
Yeah, no problem. If it's a medium observation, we give 60 days, time for closing the gap. And if it is low observation, usually we give 120 days. And again, it depends on organization's requirement and the process which are being followed. Usually, high ones are the ones needs to be immediately attended. So we give, just 30 days. Some organizations even, give only 15 days time for closing the observation, because if the high observations are open, we cannot onboard them. So make sure that, and depends on the criticality of the business, business or the urge of the business to onboard the vendor. We define the day number of days for the highest to get closed, high observation to get closed. And so as the case with medium as well. And lows are okay, still good to go, but good to go even without closing it. But still, however, we need to make sure that low observations are being closed as well, because some low observation may kind of play a role in for example, some process related changes or in process improvements and stuff like that. So we make sure that lows are also getting closed, but not at a very severe level, or not at a priority level. So yeah, net, what happens is at the end of the risk assessment stage, we have to make sure that all the observations, at least high and medium observations, are being closed, and before we onboard the vendor. Yeah. So that's about risk assessment. So risk identification is all about getting the inherent risk of the vendor, and based on the risk rating and the tiers of the vendor, we define the controls to be tested. And risk assessment stage, we test the controls again based on the risk level of the vendor. The controls are, as I said, coming from ISO 27000 or NIC standard, or it's a combination of both. We test the controls with the vendor, and if at all, if you identify gaps with the process, we have to make sure that at least high and medium ones are getting closed, and then we follow for the remediation. The next comes to the risk remediation stage. So the output of the risk assessment usually, and as I said, usually comes as a report, or depends on whatever format the company follows. So, but the risk mitigation stage is where all the gaps are being closed. The usual process is usually all this gets registered in either in a tool, or depends on the convenience of the organization. Some management, some organizations may even have a simple tracker, Excel tracker to document this process. Some organization may have tools like ServiceNow, or any other tools, Remedy, or tools to register this entire process. So all these observations are registered either in a tool or a spreadsheet. So the risk mitigation stage, have to make sure that the gaps which are being raised needs to be closed with the vendor. So usually the team sitting for risk mitigation, they make sure that they follow with the vendor, get the evidences, sufficient evidences, for the risk for the risk closure. Especially, as I said, for the I ones, they have to make sure that that needs to be closed within the 30 days of the time frame, right? So they follow with the vendor, or follow with the business, or business spoke who coordinates with the vendor, get the evidence, make sure that the evidence suffice the requirement to close the gap, and do a retesting of the gap being identified, and make sure that the gaps are being addressed. And finally, when they close it in the system or close the tracker, whatever format following the organization. So that's a risk mitigation stage. Yeah. Any questions here in the three stages: stage one, stage two, stage three?
Yeah. Hey, Bharat, this is Manoj. So you
Yep.
talked about, three tiers, tier one, tier two, tier three. Based on, the number of critical processes are, given to the vendor or third party. So,
Yep.
and you also said that there are 50 questions. So these 50 questions remain same for all categories, or it varies from based on how critical the processes are. I mean, tier one, tier two, tier three.
It's a good question, Manoj. So again, 50 questions, is just a kind of a rough number I said, right? So every organization knowledge would have their own process, right? So I think these are two concepts. One is the tier concept, another one is the inherent risk concept, right? So usually what happens is the combination of inherent risk along with the tiers makes us to take the decision on how many controls needs to be tested, right? Whether it could be 50 or 60 or 70, but the ground rule is right. If the inherent risk is high, for example, if the inherent risk is 5 out of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest critical, right? If the inherent risk is 5 and the tier is 1, we have to make sure that most of the controls have to be tested, because that control poses more, that vendor poses more risk. 50 is a tentative number, I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it could be a number based on the unified control library framework, as I said, like combination of ISO 27001 and IST. But let's assuming that if you take only ISO 27001 control, some organization may just test the control based on only 27001 control, right? It may have,
Okay.
like, let's say 120, 130 controls out, right? Starting from defining the policies, physical security, organization security, and stuff like that. Let's assume that we have 130 controls for
Got
ISO. So for
it.
tier one, we need to test most of the control. It
Okay.
depends on the organization vendor, whatever support the vendor does, right? Most of the control needs to be tested. Out of 130, possibly 100 control needs to be tested, and again maybe 110 or 120 depends on the type of services vendor offering to us. Tier two, again, you don't have to test all the control. Again, how do we define tier one, tier two, three? It depends purely based on your discussion with the business, because the difference is tier one vendors are high critical vendors. For example, it could be for example, Microsoft, for example, right, or Google, for example, or for example, in service industry, we have Cognizant, or let's say TCS, and stuff like that. So these guys are big vendors, but we need to make sure that they fall into tier one because of the type of services they're offering. Again, the type of services also matters a lot, not only with the vendor type, but also the services they offer. Some vendor, they do a critical services to us, they also follow tier one. So defining the tier one, you need to stick to the business, and based on the tier one, the control needs to be defined, right? That's the overall strategy. Yeah, to answer your question, 50 is just a tentative number, Manoj.
I got it. I mean, just wanted. And there is another question. I mean, generally when you talk about the risk assessment, I mean, based on tier one, say if it is tier one, means a lot of critical data being shared with the vendor. It could be, credit card information, personal PI
Yeah.
information. So what is the control you talk about that once the job is executed, the data gets, purged from vendor's location. So generally, what are checks you do? Maybe in this slide, or maybe, I don't know, you could be talking about it in next slides or so.
So your question is all about if the data is getting transferred to let's say
Vendor.
a vendor, and the vendor stores your data, right? Okay, and you have to make sure that the data is being saved or data is being protected in the vendor infrastructure, right? That's a question, right? That's
No,
is
no.
that
So what I'm saying is, if the vendor is saving also the data, it can't be, forever. Maybe 1 month, 2 month, till the particular job gets executed. For
yeah.
example, you are sharing data for, maybe communicating with clients, customers, or maybe, printing statements. So once the job is executed, this needs to be purged. So I'm very, keen to know that how do you get confirmation from vendor that data is purged?
So see, usually, Manoj, okay, in terms of data, right? I'm talking from my banking experience, right? So usually
Yeah.
we don't allow the data movement outside the bank itself, outside the organization. So what happens is this when you have to understand two things. One is this process of vendor onboarding happens before even you attach the vendor to our infrastructure, right? So it's all preliminary check we are doing. These guys are not yet into our infrastructure. This is the first step before we kind of attach them to our infrastructure. So which means the data movement is still not there. We are just checking the overall infrastructure of the vendor. This is the first step.
I'm talking about, the vendor is onboarded. So after that,
Yeah.
maybe it could
If
be
the vendor
next
is
slide of
onboarded,
yours. Yeah, yeah.
usually we don't allow data movement outside the organization, especially the bank. But if, for example, some companies may allow data transfer. So as you know, right, couple of starting from the interface control, the cryptographic control, and it's data in movement and data in transit. You're talking about data in transit, right? So we have to make sure that first of all, in vendor premises, they have the
I'm talking
cryptographic.
about data at rest, what it has reached
Data
vendor
data
location.
in transit and data at rest, right?
That's right.
Data at rest. We have to make sure that they have the same level of cryptographic control or hashing algorithm. What before. As I said again, I'm re-emphasizing that usually bank doesn't allow the data move out of the premises. That's very clear. If it moves out, because that's outside outside our security compliance, right? So we don't
Okay.
usually. So if at
Oh,
all, if any company allows the data movement outside the premises, we have they have to make sure number one, they have to make sure that the vendor follows the same cryptographic standard or algorithms. For
okay.
example, and something. That's number one. Number two is on the backup, right? Where the data is being stored, where they are storing. It could be on cloud, it could be on their any of the servers and stuff like that, right? We have to make sure that they have the same level of compliance what is being followed in the parent organization, the companies who are outsourcing them, right? And contract usually gets signed for the limited time period, like 3 to 4 months or something like that. So we usually have a monitoring mechanism. The banks, the internal monitoring team or the continuous monitoring team make sure that they do frequent scanning on the vendor infrastructure where the data is being stored. There are a lot of data discovery tools and stuff like that being taken on or scanned on the vendor the files and folders where they have stored the data. Make sure that there's no data movement is happening, and also make sure that they have the same level of they follow the same level of controls on a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis till the
Okay.
time right? So these are the regular checks we do.
Yeah,
So
got
but
it.
usually I've not experienced a place where data moves out of the organization. If it moves out, make sure that the same level of compliance are being followed. Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah,
that's
got
it's
it.
a,
Yeah, thanks. Thanks.
yeah. So that's yeah. Any other question on risk assessment? I think thanks Manoj for asking that. Yeah. So yeah, so these three stages are very important because starting with risk identification, and conducting the assessment on the vendor, and finally mitigating risk. And once the risk are being mitigated, right, which means that we are giving a green signal or go ahead signal for the vendor to get onboarded, right? That's the first step. So you are kind of formally telling the business that okay, they've got the security clearance from us and you can onboard it. But again, one thing I want to highlight here is just not the security clearance usually happens in banking organization, or any other big organization. What happens is security clearance is not only the clearance usually follows for inter onboarding. There are a few other operational clearance needs to be conducted. The business side clearance have to be there, but we're just only focusing on the security clearance here, right? So it's not like once we give the security clearance, the vendor gets immediately onboarded and they get into infrastructure up and running. But again, from our security side, the process is kind of getting over, getting to an end state where we are kind of giving a green signal to the business saying, okay, they are complying with most of our policies and procedures or most of our policies and standards, and they have some reasonable assurance, when it comes to the security compliance process. So this is where we give the clearance to the business, and business takes it forward. Usually, approval happens either through an email or approval happens, through a system or tool, as I said, service now or remedy tool, and then it goes to various levels of approval, and it moves forward. So that's three stages we're talking about while we're onboarding the vendor. Okay, now we onboarded the vendor. What happens next, right? So we need to keep them on the radar, keep the vendor under our radar. So we have to make sure that vendor doesn't do any any anything which is outside the boundaries, which we didn't do any malpractices or they don't do anything suspicious and stuff like that. So we got to keep them under the radar. We got to keep them under our continuous monitoring process. So usually within the third party, they also have a team to monitor vendors' performance, vendor security process, and stuff like that. and make sure that, as I said, they run a continuous scan on the vendor infrastructure, or they kind of monitor their performance, monitor their activities and stuff like events and logs and stuff like that, and make sure that that they have a seamless connection with our security policies and procedures, right? That's usually the risk monitoring part. Happens within the third party cybersecurity program, right? And the final stage we are talking about here is exit and termination. Okay, now the vendor has done the stuff, and for example, if there's a development vendor supporting the bank or the company to develop some product, the contract is over. They have developed the product, and it's been rolled out into production. Now we got to kind of terminate the vendor, right? So we have a process for that. We need to say this. We need to make sure that their access and all the legal contractual liabilities have been properly removed, and access are being terminated, and the accounts have been deactivated or terminated, and make sure that the contractual clauses are being completely addressed, right, as per the initial agreement. Happens during the first stage of the signing of the contract. So that's exit and termination. In between, there are a few other stages. This is on a regular basis, but usually what happens is, right, some vendors they keep supporting us, right, on a yearly basis. Or we have a long term contract with the organization. So what happens is, we got to keep them, or we got to reassess them on a yearly basis. So that comes under recertification process or reassessment process. For example, if the vendor is a kind of having a long-term contract with us, we got to make sure that we got to test their controls again. It doesn't follow through the same process, though it has to follow through the same process. For example, risk identification assessment, but not a stringent process. It doesn't come through again reinventing the inherent risk. But yes, we got to make sure that any new additional things have been introduced. Make sure that you got to ask them, is there any new additional process have been introduced with the vendor side, while they're supporting the organization. Any new controls or new security controls been addressed in the past. Any new business processes have been established. All those things needs to be discussed every year on a yearly basis. Again, depends on the criticality of the vendor. If it is a one and two vendor, you don't have to do this process. If it is medium, moderate vendor, which is inherent risk 3, this reassessment process happens every 3 years. I mean, again, depends on how you design, but usually 3 years is the best practice. And for 4 and 5 vendors, usually the reassessment process happens every year, which means every year we got to reassess the control and infrastructure of the vendor. So we got to sit with the vendor again, as I said, business and vendor again, to understand the current controls, current security posture, and any process have been added, and again follows the same process of the rating, then comes to risk assessment, and comes to the other stages of the cycle. Yeah. So that's a usual process, and finally, once the service gets over, goes by exit and termination. Yeah, that's the overall structure all about in security management. So these are the stages which usually any company follows. For the third-party cybersecurity process program, and that's how it gets triggered. Any questions here?
Hi, Bharat. Krishna here.
Yeah,
So we had a discussion about the third party. So there are certain scenarios like where even the third party outsource their services to fourth party. And so now during this exit and termination, let's say once the third party is offboarded, so how do we as a bank ensure that the data is stored in fourth party, let's say cloud service provider or some hosting environment? How do we ensure that those data are securely destructed?
I think it's a very good point, Krishna. In fact, I didn't speak about the fourth party here. I mean, because it's a separate topic, but it's a very good question. So usually, what happens is, right, while we are taking this happens during the first stage, Krishna and everyone, right? So while you are doing the risk identification process, right, you got to also ask the vendor or ask the business whether the vendor, which is the third party for us, right, have any contract, or do they have any fourth party, which where in turn they get support from them, which means like the vendor, for example, if you're outsourcing to vendor A, the vendor A is again having some relationship with vendor B, right? We need to make sure that the vendor B service also gets captured in our contract, which means the vendor A might have dependency with vendor B, and so vendor B also needs to be part of our contract and our scrutiny. So which means we need to make sure that, as Krishna has said, right? So if we have a dependency with vendor A in terms of getting some support, and what kind of dependency vendor A has with B, which means are they going to transfer our data, or are they going to, for example, let's talk about cloud infrastructure, right? In cloud, we don't even know where our data is being hosted, right? We are, let's say, we are a cloud service provider, to host our data, and we won't turn host our host the data in with some other multi-tenant cloud or something like that. So they are taking help from fourth party. Or easy example is, for example, let's say you're outsourcing outsourcing a process or project to a to a service company, or let's say TCS or Cognizant, right? And they are in turn outsourcing the work to let's say another company, right? Fourth party. So we have to make sure that everything gets captured in the risk identification form, so that if there is a dependency on the data element, right? We have to make sure that we got to take reports, sufficient report like SOC 2 report or any compliance report from them, to make sure that this data is being traveled or transferred, or moving within this environment safe. But if the fourth party is dealing with our data, we really cannot encourage. Usually, we don't encourage the data flow between our data flow between third party and fourth party. If you feel that the third party is going to transfer our data to fourth party, which is like organization data to fourth party, then we really cannot encourage that. We know that process should not happen, because I think it ends up there. Worst case, if this is the real critical requirement, we got to make sure that we get the compliance report, as I said, SOC 2 and other legal reports, legal clearances before we move forward here.
Okay. Okay.
So I think that brings a very important topic. Is like we also have to make sure that we are in line with the SOC 2 report and ISO 27000 report. Some vendor might not allow us to test their infrastructure. That depends on various factors. For example, a similar, like, let's say I used to work for Standard Chartered or any other bank in that case, right? If at all, if another bank is supporting us, right? For example, let's say Citibank, we're taking some support from Citibank, right? So Citibank sometimes may not allow us to test their control, because they already have a strong security control. They don't. So they usually, what happens is, if that being the case, either we can whitelist them based on a similar hierarchy or similar structure they have. That depends on the business to take a call. Whitelisting meaning you got to make sure that they got to demonstrate that they have the same level of control, the vendor who are supporting us. Or the next option is, we can actually take their compliance report, internal report like SOC 2 and similar report, to make sure that their infrastructure is being tested against the security compliance and standards here. So this is again very important criteria to know. So whitelisting is very common only if the vendor have a similar status or equal status. Status, as I say, a kind of similar environment, or similar banking environment, or similar technology setup, or something like that. Yeah, those vendors can be whitelisted, but again depends on the business justification, and so many factors are involved in that. Yeah. Okay, and I'll move on. So this is overall strategies which could strengthen the overall the cybersecurity management process, again based on the experience what we have seen, or what I have seen in the past. So one is, we'll have to make sure we have a very strong third parties management process, which means that you'll have to have first of all, we'll have to have an inventory of the all vendor, right? So in major banks, as I said, in Standard Chartered, we have more than 3,000, 4,000 vendors. So we got to have a proper inventory of the vendor, classify them as per the tier 1 tires. It could be tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and make sure that the testings are being conducted based on the inherent risk against the tier 1. So we got the inventory has to be proper, right? If the inventory is not proper, then which means that we are missing out a major chunk, right? So we may not focus on the critical vendors, and a lot of vendors may go unmissed, may go unattended, and again that increases cybersecurity risk overall. So we got to make sure the inventory of the vendors are proper and being checked on a periodic basis. And and make sure that I think, as Krishna pointed out now, that we got to make sure that the TPRM program not only identifies your identifies your third party, it also makes sure that your program also elevates to your fourth party and the vendor and your fourth party, so that everyone are in compliance with your organization security policies and standards, right? So that's very important. The first step. The second step is to have a is to implement a risk-based third-party cybersecurity program, which means risk-based. If I say right, the risk control-based cybersecurity program, which means the control has to come from a best practices and standard. I spoke about ISO 27001 and NIST and PCI DSS and SOC 2. I think integrated approach is the best way, but again depends on the your organization size and your expectation and your vision. Either you could go for one framework or a combination of two framework, and you can build your program. But again, it should be a control based approach, so that the controls are mapped against the security risk, and the programs can be designed right. So again, as I said, vulnerability management and testing process should be embedded in this program, so that the vendors infrastructure are being tested against these the VM vulnerability management process, and make sure that their infrastructure is clean and in compliance with your security requirement. The third important aspect is you have to develop a strong incident response program. If anything happens because of because of a vendor, right? So either you have to have a strong mechanism which is communicated to a vendor on what needs to be channelized and what needs to be communicated. And the second thing is how to contain and mitigate those breaches, right? So this incident response process or program, right, needs to be well defined and needs to be communicated to the vendor, so the vendor knows what should happen if any breaches occurs because of them, or overall or overall a countrywide breach or regional wise breach. So they want to make sure that what needs to be done immediate as an immediate step or first step as a first priority. Who needs to get notified, and all this needs to be clearly defined and clearly communicated to the vendor, so that vendor should know what happens next, right? What should happen next. And the final thing is all about how do you communicate the program, third party risk program, to your internal employees and your colleagues. They should also get to know what is this program all about. All these policies and procedures should be up to date, and make sure that all your employees, every individual in the organization, every individual in your company should read those policies, especially to begin with, not only specific to a third party, right? It should begin with your overall information security policies and stuff like that, and they should get familiarized with all these policies. That would make this program very effective, because third party is one element of it, but the overall the umbrella lies with the overall your cyber security requirement of your company, and how it's been designed and why it's been defined. So these are the four important things which I could think about to strategize and strengthen your process. Yeah. Any questions here? I think I tried covering as much as I can within this 1 hour. But yeah, I think it's a very big topic. But overall, yes, third-party cybersecurity is a very important thing, especially in banks and especially in critical businesses, like even in manufacturing sectors, in healthcare. I think they play a very important role, because most of the vendors are supporting our critical strategies and initiatives. So we got to make sure that they have the same level of security compliance requirements what our organization have, and you got to keep on educating the vendors and keep on educating your internal employees in following our procedures and policies and procedures, and the best practice needs to be followed. And usually, third party cybersecurity program, third party cybersecurity team, right? Usually comes under CISO. Depends on this organization, right? And again, and they are part of overall information cybersecurity in bank in Standard Chartered. We have a big unit, and third party the big information cybersecurity, and third party is part of the big unit. And but again, not necessarily that it has to follow the same protocol. But third party cybersecurity program usually comes under CISO, so which means that this team plays a very important role in safeguarding the organization's assets. Um So I think the most important factor is to make sure that the internal employees gets aware about what you guys are doing and what this team is all about, and educating them on the requirements side on how to deal with the vendor. Yeah, I think that's overall I would like to cover today. And if you have any questions, we can talk here, and I'm happy to share with you.
I think most of the questions are actually thrown when you are delivering it, Bharat. Thank you very much.
Sure, yeah. So, if any offline questions, please touch base with Subbu, and when you have my contact number, and when I'm in my LinkedIn as well, you can find out me in LinkedIn. I'm happy
Yeah,
to.
to everybody, I will ensure that this presentation is already emailed to you. I think we have Mr. Parthasarthi, with his company name, contact number, everything on the message. Okay, so we'll make all the presentation to everybody here. Okay, thank you very much. Any questions from you, Ravi? Ravi, Arpita, Ilango, and Narayan Thirumalai.
No, nothing. No question from
No
me.
questions.
I just wanted to check only one thing. Bharat.
Yeah.
Have you like when we talk about process from a processor perspective, right? This is more from a data privacy part of it, right? So
Yeah.
the first party becomes the controller, or how about how about the vendor?
Vendor
And
becomes a processor, actually, Ravi.
yeah, the
Yeah.
processor. Then there was another interesting point that was brought up by the person, I think Krishna Prasad had brought up. The fourth thing, the sub-processor.
Yeah.
Within the processor, there is another sub-processor. So from a data privacy standpoint, how do you handle this? Just for my understanding.
This is the question. Okay, the question is your data, right? It's your organization data. Now you're outsourcing or your data is moving to, or your data is being managed by your third party, and your third party is done. They are having
Again,
some
we
kind
have a
of
fourth party.
third party. Okay.
Yeah. So from a data privacy standpoint, how do we ensure that we are compliant?
Okay, see, the compliance control, Ravi, is always with the controller, okay, with the consent of the data subject, okay. The data is actually being passed from the controller to processor, sub-processor, sub-sub-processor, sub-sub-sub-processor, okay. Now, if there is a requirement for us to, it all depends upon what the data owner, the data subject basically wants, right? So the data subject is going to say that I want, and let's say the classic example I use for the Airtel in the class, okay? If they're going to say that, okay, we want a paper-based bill, then the Airtel might give it to another party, print the bill, and then India Post might deliver the bill. That becomes sub-processor. If they're going to say that, okay, we want a PDF copy of a bill, then the company which is printing the bill, the India Post is actually, their presence is eliminated. So it all depends upon the situation, but the controller is actually the person who's collecting it, not the person, the company which is collecting the data. Now, depending upon what the data subject is actually requesting, the data controller might pass on to, the processor, sub-processor, sub-sub-processor. All these things will happen with the consent of the data subject. Still, the control is with the controller. Okay, whatever the controller says, they should be doing it, because for the end customer, for the data subject is always the controller. I'm sorry, but because all these people are with me for the CDPO, so I just took the liberty to speak, in that particular angle.
Absolutely, super. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for
Subbu,
coming.
Krishna here. I just want to add one more point here.
Yeah.
As per the Ravi's question, so you're asking about the fourth party processor. So the first foremost thing when you outsource any data, either it's a third party or fourth party, the first thing comes into mind is like the CPA. The CPA is a controller process agreement. That is to ensure who is going to process the data, either it's a bank or the organization data. So is the third party is going to process? Yes, or else the subcontractor is going to process. So first, the CPA need to be defined. The reason is if any breach happens, now who's going to take the penalty? So that is a key area. So that's the initial part which need to be defined. And once that is agreed, then we need to understand how they're going to process the data.
Yeah. See, with respect to the GDPR, the company which is going to pay the penalty is always the controller. Maybe the controller, processor, sub-processor, sub-sub-processor might have a back-to-back agreement, but the accountability is always the controller.
Yeah, I think I agree, Subha. I think overall, right, Accountability lies with the controller, because the when controller have to make sure that they're protecting the customer data. Like after all, we are working on customer data, protecting the customer data. Even if you're subcontracting or subcontracting it, right? End of the day, we are accountable. But we have to make sure that the sufficient controls are being designed, with whomsoever, right? With whether it's third party, fourth party. That's our responsibility. The two are, one is accountability, and the one is like in terms of designing the control. Yeah,
For
and
example, I'm ordering food in Swiggy, okay, and Swiggy, okay, connects to the restaurants. Restaurants will buy the ingredients from some other company, oil from some other company. But moment my health is affected, okay, now whom will I catch hold of? Okay, the restaurant cannot say, it is the company from where I bought the chili. Then I would say that you should be buying it from a proper company, right? And okay, you go to the restaurant, you eat, impact is for you. So what I'm saying is the controller who collects the data, if you are not capable of securing it, don't collect it. If you're capable of securing it, you secure it. Okay, if you're going to involve a third party, okay, ensure that they are securing it. Because finally the data is my gold. I keep it in the bank locker. The bank locker might have the vulnerability, but the impact is on the gold. My data is going to be at stake.
yeah. So I have one question. So, do you have any? I mean, it always been my ask actually. In fact, I checked with you already. Like, is there any certification specific to third party, or is it part of your overall training process? Because
In fact, I was about to ask you that question, and I was waiting to ask, is there standard? See, there is a standard.
see there are tool based, vendor based certifications are there. I mean, probably we need to find out, because see these tool based,
ISO
vendor based.
20, ISO 28,000, we have standard for supply chain security. Okay.
That is very specific actually. That's very good, but very good. Yeah.
So we can see, like, even the third party security, Ravi said, the controller process, sub processor, we can actually map it to third party security. ISO 28,000 also you can map it to third party security, though it doesn't speak only about the IT third party, generally a third party, but we can still tailor it
Yeah.
to IT requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those certifications would definitely be beneficial, because we have growing number of needs for third party and stuff like that.
They'll come. They need money.
Of course, yeah. See, if in my previous role, right, the team overall team size, we had for third party. In fact, we have bigger teams as well. Like we were operating with more than 120 people, like so third party cybersecurity professional. Now it's with reorg, but yeah, we had 120 team members just to support the vendors, of these 5,000, 6,000 vendors.
That's why I was behind you for this particular day, bro.
Yeah, again, depends on the organization, but yes, I think it's a very growing. I mean, it's a growing profile, because most of the processes are being outsourced these days, right? For convenience sake and for efficiency purpose and for strategic purpose. So, the more and more it gets outsourced, right? All we have a heavy dependency and reliance on the vendor, and obviously that is again connected with the the controls needs to be implemented and stuff like that. I think the third party certification definitely needs to be promoted well, yeah, because we need to understand the controls and framework and stuff like that. Yeah,
Maybe
international
let's
controls.
have a workshop on 28,000 one of the weekend, and we will see. Me, you, and Gautam Kula was actually there with us. So he's a CISO for Amazon Pay. Unfortunately, I think we missed him now, but we will see if we can do a workshop on ISO 28,000, which is supply chain security from the perspective of IT. So that will be an exact third-party security.
Yeah, and, one more challenge, right? I think probably I will end up with a note, right? So usually, what happens? And I think it's a very funny thing, because usually most of the organization would have their SOC 2 compliance, or third party compliance. They get it from either some big fours or some governing attestation bodies. So usually, what happens is it's very rarely, rarely we go and do a testing on the complaint infrastructure. We usually have it's a ready-made copy, software copy. They have the moment, even before you ask them, right? They give this third-party security report to you. But sometimes what happens is that control what is being tested there may not be directly relevant to your organization standards and stuff like that. So you got to do a delta testing, or you got to do a mapping exercise on what that SOC 2 report provided by the vendor, and what you have, what is your need, from an organization perspective. That takes longer time actually. So usually that's one tricky situation always happens, because it's very easy to get a SOC 2 certification from a vendor. Not easy in the sense like it's a standard process where the vendor or any organization goes for SOC 2 and get this ready. But whether it is relevant to you or not, that itself is a huge exercise, and which is what we always face it as a challenge. So it is more. It takes more time than doing a full-fledged cyber vendor assessment. The delta mapping and the extra control needs to be verified. That takes more time actually. That's one challenge is probably I forgot to mention. Usually happens in our infrastructure.
Yeah, except somebody's death certificate. Na? Every certificate easily got. So anyway, we will address that also. We'll have one more workshop on this particular thing. 28,000. I will discuss with you. Okay, and then we will do that, Bharat. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Okay.
Thanks all.
I'm sorry we have overshot by 15 minutes because I was asking Bharat few questions. Okay. Okay, so I will share this presentation with you all. So enjoy your remaining Sunday evening.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Subbu.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Krishna.
Thank you, Bharat.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Bharat. It was a very informative session. Thank you so much.
My pleasure for sharing that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.